My beloved brothers and sisters, let me tell you something that many people never admit out loud. A woman is only controlled the moment she forgets who she is. People don't overpower you because they're strong. They overpower you because they've convinced you that you're not. And the day you stop believing that lie is the day every form of manipulation collapses. Today, I want to speak to every sister who has been silenced, sidelined, dismissed, or emotionally cornered. Because if you knew the strength Allah placed inside you, you would never accept half love, broken respect, or someone else's dominance over your heart. This message is not about rebellion. It's about reclaiming the dignity Allah already gave you. And once you understand that dignity, no man alive will ever be able to control you again. One of the first places where control begins is in the heart. Not through force, not through shouting, not through physical dominance, but through shaping how a woman sees herself. If she believes her worth depends on people, she becomes easy to manipulate. If she believes her worth comes from Allah, she becomes impossible to break. The reality is simple. The person who defines your worth controls your life. Many women grow up hearing opinions, judgments, comparisons, and expectations from everyone around them, family, culture, society, and sometimes even from well-meaning people who don't understand the damage they are causing. Slowly, without realizing it, a woman starts measuring herself through human eyes instead of divine guidance. And that's where the vulnerability begins. If a woman's sense of worth depends on a man's attention, she will tolerate disrespect just to keep that attention. If her worth depends on being liked, she will silence herself to avoid conflict. If her worth depends on praise, she will constantly perform, pretending to be someone she's not, just to keep people impressed. And once someone realizes that she needs their approval to feel valuable, control becomes effortless. But the moment she shifts her internal foundation, the moment she firmly anchors her worth in Allah, everything changes. Because when a woman truly understands that her value comes from her Creator, not His creation, she sees through the games instantly. Compliments no longer blind her. Criticism no longer breaks her. Rejection no longer defines her, and attention no longer buys her silence. When she knows that Allah is the one who honors her, she stops giving people the power to dishonor her. This is why the Quran constantly reminds believers that honor, izzah, belongs to Allah, not society, not culture, not relationships, not wealth, not status, not appearance. Allah says He honored the children of Adam, all of them. That means a woman's worth isn't earned. It's given. It's intrinsic. It's built into her existence. So when a woman forgets this divine honor, she ends up chasing man-made substitutes for it. Compliments, validation, attention, flattery, and every time she chases those things, she puts herself at the mercy of whoever is handing them out. Think about it. If you depend on someone's words to feel seen, you will fear losing them. If you depend on someone's presence to feel valuable, you will cling even when they mistreat you. If you depend on someone's approval to feel confident, you will twist yourself into knots trying to keep them happy. This is how emotional control works. Not through strength, but through dependence. But when a woman understands that her worth is tied to her Creator, not to the creation, she breaks the entire system of manipulation without saying a word. Suddenly, she doesn't beg for love, she chooses love. She doesn't cling to people out of fear. She remains generous while maintaining dignity. She doesn't crumble when someone withdraws affection. She knows that Allah never withdraws His mercy from a sincere heart. A woman who knows her Lord says, I don't need your approval to be valuable. Allah has already honored me. That sentence destroys 90% of the emotional leverage people use to control women. Why? Because you can't intimidate someone who isn't desperate for your validation. You can't guilt someone who isn't trying to impress you. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't fear losing you. You simply lose your power over them. And the beauty is this: when a woman's worth comes from Allah, she doesn't become arrogant, she becomes stable. She doesn't become rebellious, she becomes principled. She doesn't shut people out, she stops letting the wrong people enter too deeply. Her relationships improve because she stops behaving from insecurity and starts behaving from clarity. She loves sincerely, not fearfully. She serves generously, not desperately. She communicates honestly, not anxiously. She walks with confidence, not with emotional dependency. People feel the difference immediately. They can sense when a woman is grounded in something greater than their opinion of her. Her presence becomes lighter but stronger, softer but firmer. Impossible to push over, impossible to manipulate. And here's another truth. When a woman takes her worth from Allah, she stops settling for half-hearted treatment. She doesn't accept disrespect disguised as love. She refuses to carry emotional burdens that were never hers to hold. She recognizes red flags early because she isn't blinded by the need to be chosen. She knows she is already chosen by Allah. This mindset transforms not just her relationships but her entire life. It improves her worship because she's not distracted by seeking people's approval. It improves her emotional health because she no longer ties her identity to unstable human reactions. It improves her decisions because she is not acting from desperation. It improves her resilience because she knows that human disappointment does not define her destiny. People can reject you. People can misunderstand you. People can underestimate you. People can walk away from you, but people cannot rewrite what Allah has written for you. And that realization is where a woman's deepest strength begins. A woman who internalizes her worth from Allah becomes unshakable, not loud, not aggressive, not combative, but centered. And centered women cannot be controlled, because once you know who you are with Allah, no one can convince you to be less. One of the most powerful shifts a woman can make, and one of the most misunderstood, is learning to set boundaries without guilt, hesitation, or endless explanation. Many women are conditioned from childhood to be agreeable, accommodating, and pleasant at all costs. They are taught to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to sacrifice their needs for others, and to make everyone comfortable even if it means making themselves uncomfortable. This creates a dangerous pattern. A woman who is trained to always say yes eventually becomes surrounded by people who expect it, depend on it, and take advantage of it. That's the perfect environment for control to grow. People don't usually control women through strength, they control them through expectations. If someone knows you are too kind to say no, too afraid to disappoint, too patient to resist, too forgiving to hold the line, they will shape your behavior by pushing exactly where you never push back. When a woman has no boundaries, her kindness becomes a tool in other people's hands, her compassion becomes a weight on her neck, and her generosity becomes an open door for those who have no intention of giving back. It's not that she is weak, it's that she never learned that kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. From an Islamic perspective, boundaries are not rude. They are a necessary act of self-respect. Allah did not ask you to please people at the expense of your dignity. The Prophet ﷺ taught us not to burden ourselves beyond our ability and to speak the truth even when it is difficult. Setting boundaries is simply living those teachings with courage. A strong woman recognizes that constantly pleasing people is not compassion, it is surrendering control of your life. She understands that every yes that goes against her values, her well-being, or her sanity is actually a slow form of emotional erosion. The more she gives without limits, the more people take without gratitude. And the moment she tries to reclaim her space, those same people call her changed, selfish, or difficult. But that reaction is not proof that she's wrong. It's proof that they were benefiting from her lack of boundaries. When a woman evolves and begins to set limits, the first people to complain are the ones who were taking advantage. And that alone should tell her she is finally doing something right. A boundary is not a wall. It's not harshness. It's not arrogance. It's not rebellion. A boundary is simply a clear line that says this behavior is acceptable. This behavior is not. And a woman who respects herself enough to define those lines becomes far harder to manipulate. Because people cannot guilt trip her into compliance when she has already decided what is healthy and what is harmful. They cannot push her into exhaustion when she refuses to carry responsibilities that are not hers. They cannot use anger, silence, or emotional withdrawal to force her into submission when she understands her worth is not tied to their reaction. She learns to say no without paragraphs of explanation. She learns to say, I can't do that without fearing backlash. She learns that protecting her energy is not selfish, it is stewardship of the body, the heart, and the mind that Allah entrusted to her. A woman who always feels guilty saying no is a woman who has been conditioned to believe that her value lies in her availability. But a woman who knows her value with Allah understands that her time, her attention, and her emotional capacity are precious resources that must be guarded. The moment she starts setting boundaries, something remarkable happens internally. Peace increases, clarity increases, self-respect increases. Relationships become healthier because she is no longer acting from fear or obligation, but from authenticity and balance. She learns to differentiate between people who truly care and people who simply want access. The former respect her boundaries, the latter resist them. And this is where emotional strength emerges. A strong woman does not apologize for taking care of herself. She does not feel guilty for saying no to harmful behavior. She does not shrink her needs to protect someone else's comfort. She understands that if she doesn't protect her heart, her mind, and her peace, nobody else will. That responsibility belongs to her. When she sets boundaries, she regains control of her life. She stops allowing people to dictate her emotions. She stops carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. She stops living in a state of exhaustion, resentment, and fear. Instead, she moves into a life where her generosity is genuine, her love is intentional, and her relationships are built on mutual respect rather than silent sacrifice. The most misunderstood truth is this: a woman with no boundaries is easier to control, but she is also deeply unhappy. A woman with strong boundaries is harder to control, but she is deeply at peace, and that peace radiates. People sense that she is not desperate, not afraid, not dependent on their reactions. They approach her differently, speak to her differently, and treat her differently because they feel the strength of a woman who respects her own limits. And when people realize they cannot manipulate her through guilt or fear, most of the control they once had simply falls apart. Because the strongest women in the world are not loud or angry. They are calm, clear, and decisive. They know what they accept and what they refuse. They know who deserves access to their heart and who does not. They do not waste their lives being everything for everyone. They live with the dignity Allah granted them. This is what makes a woman uncontrollable. Not aggression, not rebellion, but the quiet, steady, unshakable confidence of someone who sets boundaries without apologizing. One of the most subtle and dangerous forms of control is emotional manipulation. It doesn't shout, it doesn't force, and it doesn't announce itself. It works quietly, slowly, shaping how a woman thinks, reacts, and even how she sees her own reality. Many women fall into this trap because manipulation doesn't look like abuse at first. It looks like concern, disappointment, guilt, affection, withdrawal, or just how he is. But underneath all of it is one goal: to make her behave in ways that benefit someone else at the expense of her own well-being, confidence, and clarity. Emotional manipulation begins when someone discovers that your emotions are accessible and predictable. If they know you hate conflict, they will use conflict to silence you. If they know you fear disappointing them, they will use guilt to steer your behavior. If they know you crave reassurance, they will withhold it until you act the way they want. If they know you doubt yourself, they will subtly deepen those doubts until your confidence becomes too weak to resist their influence. A woman who doesn't understand this pattern ends up trapped in a cycle where her emotions are being used against her. She walks on eggshells, constantly monitoring her tone, her decisions, her expressions, even her thoughts, trying to avoid triggering someone's anger or withdrawal. Slowly, she becomes less of herself and more of what the manipulator wants her to be. But a strong woman, the kind of woman Allah wants her to be, refuses to hand over her emotional steering wheel. She learns to recognize manipulation before it takes root, and she knows that anyone who tries to control her through emotions is not offering love but extracting obedience. Manipulators often rely on guilt because guilt is one of the fastest ways to control a kind-hearted woman. They say things like, "After everything I've done for you, you're still doing this?" Or, "If you cared, you would act differently," or "You're being ungrateful." These phrases are not sincere reflections of love. They are hooks designed to make her doubt her own intentions. The goal is to keep her constantly apologizing, constantly explaining, constantly proving herself to someone who never intended to treat her fairly in the first place. A strong woman understands that guilt is only valid when she has genuinely done something wrong in the sight of Allah, not when someone else feels inconvenienced or entitled. She knows that emotionally mature people communicate clearly. Manipulative people communicate through pressure, silence, or emotional punishment. Manipulators also use fear, not necessarily fear of violence, but fear of abandonment, fear of disappointment, fear of losing someone's approval. They might pull away affection to punish her, or become cold, distant, and silent until she bends to their wishes. They know she fears losing the relationship, so they create uncertainty and insecurity. And in that vulnerability, she becomes easier to control. But a strong woman, one whose heart is anchored in Allah, refuses to be controlled by the fear of losing people. She understands that fear is a poor foundation for any relationship. Fear forces you to shrink. Fear forces you to accept the unacceptable. Fear forces you to betray yourself. And a woman who knows Allah never trades her dignity for the illusion of stability in someone else's hands. Another method manipulators use is shame. They twist her mistakes into weapons, bringing them up whenever they need leverage. They exaggerate her flaws, minimize her strengths, and create an atmosphere where she feels unworthy. The weaker she feels internally, the more easily she can be controlled externally. Manipulators know that once a woman doubts herself, she becomes dependent on their approval to feel balanced again. A strong woman doesn't allow anyone to weaponize her imperfections. She knows that only Allah has the right to judge her heart and intentions. She accepts her mistakes, learns from them, repents when necessary, and moves forward without allowing anyone to chain her to guilt that Allah has already forgiven. A woman who forgives herself becomes emotionally untouchable because shame no longer owns her. Some manipulators use excessive affection and attention not to love her but to gain control. They overwhelm her with sweetness when they want compliance and withdraw completely when she does something they don't like. This push and pull dynamic keeps her emotionally unstable, always chasing the warm version of them while fearing the cold one. It's not love, it's strategic inconsistency. A strong woman refuses to depend on anyone's emotional temperature for her sense of peace. She knows that healthy love is steady, predictable, and respectful. Anyone who makes her feel like love is a reward for obedience is not someone she owes loyalty to. She steps back from emotional instability, not because she is harsh, but because she values tranquility. And tranquility is a divine blessing she refuses to sacrifice. The strength of a woman is not measured by how much she can endure, but by how clearly she can see what is happening to her. She learns to identify manipulation not through anger, but through awareness. She pays attention to patterns, not promises. She observes behavior, not excuses. She trusts her intuition, especially when the signs of emotional imbalance become too heavy to ignore. And here is the central truth. Manipulation only works when the manipulated person seeks something from the manipulator. Approval, validation, comfort, reassurance, stability. Once a woman fills those needs through Allah, through her own inner clarity, and through emotionally healthy connections, manipulation loses all its power. A woman who refuses to be manipulated does not become harsh or distant. She becomes discerning. Her compassion remains, but it is wise. Her love remains, but it is principled. Her empathy remains, but it is protected. She no longer allows guilt to lead her, fear to silence her, or shame to weaken her. She lives with emotional strength because she knows her heart belongs first to Allah, not to any human who wishes to control it. The moment a woman steps out of emotional manipulation, she begins to see how much of her life was shaped by pressure, not by authenticity. And once she sees it clearly, she never goes back. She becomes grounded, confident, and internally free. And a woman with that level of emotional clarity is almost impossible for anyone to control. One of the biggest reasons women fall into cycles of control is that they confuse compromise with self-erasure. Many women are raised to believe that being accommodating, flexible, and endlessly patient is a measure of goodness, that the more they endure, the more noble they are. But there is a razor-thin line between cooperation and collapse, between kindness and self-neglect, between being understanding and being used. That line is crossed the moment a woman starts sacrificing her own emotional health, dignity, or boundaries in the name of keeping the peace. Compromise is an essential part of any relationship, marriage, family, friendship, community. Islam teaches gentleness, mercy, forgiveness, and cooperation. But these values were never meant to be twisted into tools of manipulation where a woman is pressured to tolerate harm, silence her needs, or carry burdens that break her spirit. Compromise becomes beautiful when it is mutual, respectful, and balanced. It becomes destructive when it consistently costs one person their peace. A woman who has no internal balance often tries to prove her loyalty by giving more than she realistically can. She changes her routines, suppresses her feelings, sets aside her dreams, absorbs someone else's emotional weight, and excuses behavior that drains her. In her mind, she believes this is patience, sacrifice, or righteousness. In reality, she is slowly emptying herself to maintain a relationship that is taking far more than it ever gives back. The truth is uncomfortable but necessary. When you give beyond your limits, people rarely stop you. They simply learn that your limits don't matter. And once someone realizes that you will compromise even when it hurts, even when it is unfair, even when it damages your emotional well-being, they begin to expect it. Not always out of malice, but out of habit. You teach people how to treat you by the behavior you consistently allow. A strong woman understands that compromise must never come at the cost of her self-respect. She knows that Allah does not ask her to destroy herself for the sake of pleasing anyone. She understands that she is responsible for protecting the heart Allah placed inside her, and that constant self-neglect is not a form of faith, it is a distortion of it. When a woman reaches the point where she has nothing left for herself because she gave everything to someone who did not reciprocate, she becomes vulnerable to deeper control. Exhaustion makes her easier to manipulate. Emotional depletion makes her carer. Confusion makes her more compliant. The more she sacrifices herself, the easier it becomes for someone else to dominate the space she once filled with strength. A woman who truly honors herself does not reject compromise. She simply refuses to confuse it with obedience to human expectations. She knows that Islam encourages kindness, but never at the expense of justice. She knows that patience is a virtue, but not when patience becomes an excuse for someone else's harmful behavior. She knows that loyalty is beautiful, but not when loyalty becomes bondage. Healthy compromise looks like two people working together toward fairness. Unhealthy compromise looks like one person shrinking so the other person feels bigger. Strong women learn to ask themselves important questions. Is this compromise bringing peace to both of us, or is it only costing me? Am I adjusting because it's wise, or because I'm afraid of conflict? Am I doing this out of love or out of fear of losing someone? Is the sacrifice strengthening the relationship or weakening me? These questions help her recognize when compromise is becoming self-erasure. Sometimes women feel guilty for asserting their needs because they've been conditioned to believe that expressing discomfort is selfish. But the reality is the opposite. A woman who communicates her needs clearly is healthier emotionally and spiritually. She prevents resentment from building. She prevents silent suffering from turning into explosive anger. She prevents long-term emotional damage that will eventually harm the relationship far more than an honest conversation ever could. A strong woman understands that unresolved pain does not disappear. It simply grows quiet until it becomes a burden too heavy to carry. She refuses to silence her heart out of fear. She knows that silence can be noble when it prevents unnecessary conflict, but it becomes harmful when it allows injustice or emotional neglect to flourish. Self-destruction begins when a woman repeatedly tells herself, "It's fine," when it is not fine. When she convinces herself that enduring mistreatment makes her strong, when she calls unhealthy sacrifice patience. But patience in Islam is not meant to justify harm. It is meant to help a person rise above hardship without losing themselves. Strength is not measured by how much a woman tolerates, but by how clearly she recognizes what should never be tolerated. A woman rooted in spiritual clarity does not fear saying, this hurts me, or this is not fair, or this is crossing my boundary. She knows that honesty is not disrespectful. Truthful communication is not disobedience. Protecting herself is not rebellion. She understands that Allah does not want her to destroy her emotional, mental or physical well-being under the illusion of maintaining a relationship. She realizes that true love does not demand constant sacrifice from only one side. True love requires balance, the kind of balance where both hearts feel supported, valued and respected. A relationship rooted in one-sided compromise will eventually collapse under the weight of its own imbalance. The strongest women are not the ones who endure the most suffering. They are the ones who recognize when suffering has no purpose and no righteousness behind it. They are the women who know when to give, when to compromise, and when to firmly say, this is where I stop. They do not kill their own spirit to keep anyone comfortable. They know that peace is a blessing from Allah, and a blessing should never be traded for a relationship that feels like a burden placed on only one set of shoulders. A woman who understands this becomes impossible to control because she no longer hands over her well-being to anyone. She decides where she bends and where she stands firm. She chooses compromise out of wisdom, never out of fear. She protects her dignity before she protects someone's ego. And because she values herself, others learn to value her as well. One of the most misunderstood strengths a woman can possess is the ability to choose silence with intention. Many women stay quiet because they are scared of conflict, scared of anger, scared of backlash, scared of being misunderstood, or scared of disappointing someone they care about. This kind of silence is not strength, it is survival. And when silence becomes a coping mechanism for fear, it becomes an open invitation for manipulation. People quickly learn that all they need to do to control her is raise their voice, change their tone, withdraw affection, or show disappointment. Her silence becomes predictable, and predictable silence becomes a tool in someone else's hands. But the silence of a strong woman is completely different. It is not rooted in fear. It is rooted in wisdom, restraint, emotional intelligence, and spiritual clarity. A mature woman understands that silence has many forms. Silence that protects peace, silence that avoids unnecessary conflict, silence that gives space for emotions to settle, silence that reflects dignity, and silence that refuses to feed manipulation. This kind of silence cannot be exploited because it does not come from weakness. A woman who chooses silence wisely is not someone who avoids confrontation. She simply refuses to engage in battles that have no purpose. She knows that arguing with someone who is angry, irrational, manipulative, or closed-minded is not a sign of strength. It is a waste of emotional energy. She understands that responding to every provocation is a trap, not a solution. Some people argue not to find truth, but to gain control, to intimidate, or to destabilize the other person emotionally. A strong woman does not give them that satisfaction. Her silence is not surrender, it is discipline. She knows when speaking is necessary, but she also knows that silence can be a shield that protects her from being dragged into emotional chaos created by others. Rather than reacting impulsively, she pauses. She observes. She assesses the intention behind someone's words. She understands the difference between conversations meant to resolve and conversations meant to dominate. And she chooses her responses based on clarity, not emotion. Many women fall into the trap of believing that explaining themselves endlessly will earn understanding or respect. But manipulators do not seek understanding, they seek leverage. The more you explain yourself to someone who is not listening, the more you hand them pieces of yourself that they can later use against you. A strong woman avoids this trap. She understands that over-explaining is a symptom of insecurity. She knows that her words are valuable, and she doesn't waste them on people who are not sincere. She speaks when it aligns with dignity, and she remains silent when speaking would feed toxicity. She has trained herself not to react to emotional pressure, guilt, passive aggressiveness, or dramatic displays. She knows that manipulators depend on reaction. Silence cuts off their fuel source. A woman who responds only when she chooses to respond, not when someone pushes her, becomes extremely difficult to control. This kind of silence is deeply connected to self-respect. She no longer feels the urge to defend herself from baseless accusations or prove her worth to people who are determined not to see it. She doesn't rush to correct misunderstandings created intentionally to provoke her. She doesn't allow people to drag her into endless cycles of emotional arguments that start nowhere and end nowhere. She has learned that peace is more valuable than being right, and clarity is more valuable than constant confrontation. Islam teaches a form of silence that is rooted in wisdom, silence that reflects patience, humility, and emotional control. The Prophet ﷺ would remain silent when speaking, would escalate conflict, hurt someone unnecessarily, or distract from truth. Following this example, a strong woman learns that not every situation deserves her voice, and not every voice deserves her response. Her silence is a choice, not a consequence. It is a conscious decision to protect her energy and preserve her tranquility. And because her silence is intentional, she can also choose to speak firmly when boundary violations occur. The same woman who is silent during meaningless arguments can be fearless and clear when something truly matters. Her silence is not avoidance, it is focus. People often underestimate a woman who doesn't react. They think she is weak or easily controlled because she isn't loud. They think her calmness is submission. They mistake her restraint for vulnerability. But they soon realize that she is impossible to manipulate because she doesn't reward provocation. She doesn't respond to emotional blackmail. She doesn't panic when someone withdraws affection. She doesn't crumble when someone gives her the silent treatment because she is already comfortable with silence. Her silence comes from strength, not from dependence. A woman who chooses silence wisely disrupts manipulative patterns. The person trying to control her becomes frustrated because the tactics that worked on others, anger, guilt, shame, raised voices, emotional threats, have no effect on her. She has mastered the art of emotional detachment, not in a cold or harsh way, but in a centered, grounded way that is rooted in self-worth. She is not emotionally numb. She is emotionally disciplined. She also understands that silence can be a powerful form of communication. When she goes quiet, it sends a clear message: I am not participating in this behavior. Her silence becomes a mirror that reveals the other person's true nature. Manipulators hate silence because it forces them to confront themselves. Rational, sincere people appreciate it because it prevents unnecessary harm. A wise woman recognizes that silence is not always the answer. Sometimes speaking up is obligatory, especially when injustice is involved. But she doesn't confuse boldness with impulsiveness. She doesn't confuse courage with aggression. She doesn't confuse emotional expression with emotional exposure. Her voice is strongest when she chooses to use it, not when someone pushes her into using it. This is what makes her difficult to control. She cannot be emotionally provoked. She cannot be pushed into reactions that compromise her dignity. She cannot be pressured into saying something she doesn't mean. Her silence creates a psychological barrier that manipulators cannot penetrate. She is calm because she knows her worth. She is silent because she is discerning. She is firm because she trusts Allah. And when her silence comes from this type of strength, no manipulation can influence her because she no longer responds to fear, pressure, or emotional games. She responds only to truth. A woman's strength is not built in isolation. It is built through the people she allows into her life, the voices she listens to, the energy she accepts, and the environment she chooses to grow in. Many women underestimate how profoundly their inner circle influences their emotional stability, self-worth, decisions, and resilience. You cannot stay strong if you are constantly surrounded by people who weaken you. You cannot maintain clarity if your environment feeds confusion. And you cannot protect your dignity if the people closest to you normalize disrespect. The truth is simple. The company you keep shapes the story you live. A woman who is surrounded by toxic individuals gradually absorbs the emotional climate they create. Over time, she may start believing the lies they repeat, the doubts they plant, or the limitations they impose on her. Toxic people do not always come with warnings. Sometimes they appear as family members who belittle her dreams, friends who undermine her confidence, or emotional partners who offer affection only when it benefits them. These individuals drain her energy, question her judgment, and confuse her sense of worth. The danger of keeping the wrong people close is not immediate, it's gradual. They chip away at her clarity one comment at a time. They weaken her confidence one doubt at a time. They build dependency one emotional withdrawal at a time. And before she realizes it, their voices become louder than her own intuition and heavier than her own values. A strong woman refuses to build her life in an environment that keeps her small. She understands that not every relationship is meant to be permanent, and not every connection is meant to be honored with access to her heart. She recognizes that emotional well-being is directly tied to the quality of the people she surrounds herself with. So she becomes selective, not out of ego, but out of self-respect. She chooses people who remind her of Allah, because those people will never allow her to forget herself. She chooses people who encourage growth, not insecurity. She chooses friends who celebrate her progress rather than competing with it. And she chooses relationships where communication flows honestly, respect flows naturally, and kindness flows without manipulation. When a woman surrounds herself with the right people, her emotional landscape transforms. She stops feeling alone in her struggles because she has people who listen without judgment and advise without personal agendas. She stops internalizing negative narratives because she has voices around her that reflect her true worth. She stops feeling guilty for setting boundaries because she has people who understand the importance of emotional balance. Healthy company strengthens a woman's ability to resist control. When you have supportive people in your life, manipulation becomes easier to detect because you have a clear point of comparison. You cannot mistake toxic behavior for normal behavior when you've experienced kindness and respect firsthand. A woman surrounded by healthy minds develops clarity that toxic people cannot penetrate. Many people remain trapped in controlling relationships because they are isolated emotionally, socially, or psychologically. When you have no support system, the manipulator becomes your entire world, your only reference point, your only voice, your only emotional anchor. That isolation magnifies their power. But when a woman has a strong circle, she has something toxic people fear: perspective. She can step back and evaluate rather than getting lost in someone else's emotional maze. A supportive environment doesn't mean surrounding yourself only with people who praise you. Supportive people are those who tell you the truth with compassion, who hold your hand when life gets heavy, who help you correct your mistakes without crushing your spirit, and who remind you of your strength when difficult situations make you forget it. A strong woman also understands that sometimes the person she needs to distance herself from is someone she deeply loves. Love does not justify allowing someone to weaken your relationship with yourself or with Allah. Love does not excuse manipulation, disrespect, or emotional instability. A strong woman has the courage to step back even when it hurts, because she values long-term emotional and spiritual health over short-term comfort. Choosing the right people is not about finding perfect individuals. It's about finding those who do not require you to abandon your values, silence your voice, or compromise your peace. People who energize you, not exhaust you. People who make you feel safe, not anxious. People who hold space for your growth, not cling to your weakness. And it is not only about adding the right people, it is also about subtracting the wrong ones. A woman's strength grows immensely the moment she removes people who feed negativity or control. When she distances herself from those who manipulate her with guilt or fear. When she reduces the influence of those who discourage her or consistently drain her. Removing harmful company is not cruelty, it is emotional hygiene. Islam emphasizes the importance of good companionship, because your environment affects your heart, your decisions, and your destiny. The Prophet ﷺ taught that a person is upon the religion of their closest companion, meaning your relationships shape your mindset, your behavior, and your spiritual direction. A strong woman understands this deeply. She protects her heart by protecting her circle. A woman surrounded by healthy, sincere people becomes grounded in confidence. She becomes resistant to manipulation because she is no longer emotionally dependent on one person's mood or approval. She becomes harder to control because she is not isolated. She has external support, emotional stability, and spiritual grounding. She becomes a woman who listens to advice but not manipulation, who appreciates companionship but not control, who welcomes connection but not dependency. Her environment strengthens her rather than swallowing her identity. And when she surrounds herself with the right people, something powerful happens. Her strength becomes consistent, not temporary. Her decisions become clearer, not reactive. Her heart becomes lighter, not burdened. Her dignity becomes natural, not forced. A woman with a strong support system, internally and externally, becomes almost impossible to control because she is lifted by a structure bigger than any one person's influence. The deepest form of control does not begin with manipulation, guilt, or fear. It begins with attachment. When a woman's heart is overly attached to a person, her entire emotional stability becomes tied to that relationship. This is where control gains its strongest grip. The fear of losing someone becomes stronger than the fear of losing herself. The desire to keep peace becomes stronger than the desire to keep dignity. The hope of being loved becomes stronger than the commitment to being respected. And this imbalance creates the perfect environment for control. A woman who fears losing people becomes easy to influence. She accepts behavior she shouldn't accept. She apologizes for things she shouldn't apologize for. She hides her discomfort to avoid conflict. She tolerates disrespect because she is terrified of abandonment. Her decisions shift from what is right to what will keep them from leaving. And in that moment, she becomes emotionally dependent rather than emotionally grounded. But a woman who trusts Allah more than she fears losing any human being breaks that entire structure of control. She understands that no relationship, no person, no emotional attachment, and no worldly bond can ever be more important than her spiritual and emotional integrity. She knows that Allah is the one who writes her destiny, not the people she clings to. She knows that sustenance, peace, companionship, emotional stability, and blessings come from Allah and Allah alone. A woman who trusts Allah deeply does not fear being alone because she knows she is never truly alone. She does not fear losing someone because she believes that whatever leaves her was never meant to stay, and whatever is meant to stay will never leave her unless Allah decrees it. This mindset gives her internal freedom, the type of freedom that makes manipulation nearly impossible. A woman becomes emotionally unshakable when she realizes that the worst thing that can happen to her is not losing a man, a relationship, or approval, but losing her connection with Allah. That fear becomes her compass, her anchor, and her shield. And when she prioritizes Allah above all, she becomes someone who cannot be intimidated by the possibility of losing temporary companionship. This does not mean she becomes cold, detached, or unable to love. Quite the opposite. She loves more purely because her love is not rooted in fear. She loves without desperation, serves without expecting anything in return, and gives without destroying herself. She knows that her heart belongs to the one who created it, not the one who seeks to control it. Fear-based attachment makes a woman shrink. Allah-based trust makes her rise. Many women stay in harmful environments because they fear their life will fall apart without certain people. But a strong woman recognizes that the one thing she truly cannot live without is Allah. People may leave, but Allah remains. People may disappoint, but Allah never does. People may break your heart, but Allah heals it in ways no human ever could. When a woman builds her life on this foundation, she becomes emotionally independent in the healthiest way. She no longer negotiates her worth in exchange for someone's presence. She no longer sacrifices her peace just to secure a relationship. She no longer tolerates disrespect because she is terrified of being alone. She understands that Allah does not tie her destiny to someone who harms her. If a person walks away, it is only because Allah has written something better, not necessarily better in comfort, but better in growth, clarity and spiritual elevation. A manipulator's greatest weapon is a woman's fear of loss. But when that fear no longer exists, control collapses. You cannot manipulate someone who has surrendered her fears to Allah. You cannot intimidate someone who believes firmly that Allah will replace everything she loses with something better. You cannot dominate someone who values Allah's approval more than human approval. This level of trust transforms her. She becomes calm in situations that once terrified her. She becomes decisive where she once hesitated. She becomes brave where she once felt paralyzed. She becomes dignified where she once bent too low. Trust in Allah does not make her reckless, it makes her clear. She begins to see relationships for what they are, not guarantees of security, but opportunities for growth. She sees people as travelers in her life, not owners of her identity. She sees love as a blessing, not a prison. A strong woman knows that placing her entire emotional foundation in one person is dangerous because humans are inconsistent by nature. Even the best of people can disappoint, change, or unintentionally hurt. But Allah is constant. His mercy does not change with mood. His care does not depend on your behavior. His companionship is not withdrawn as punishment. His love is not transactional. When a woman anchors her heart in Allah, she finally experiences emotional stability that no human being can offer her. This stability is what gives her the courage to say no when she needs to set boundaries without shaking, to walk away from manipulation without guilt, and to choose dignity even when her heart is attached. She trusts that Allah will never take something from her without replacing it with something that brings her closer to Him, even if the replacement is growth, strength, clarity, or a higher level of self-respect. Trusting Allah more than she fears losing anyone frees a woman from emotional slavery. She no longer begs for love, acceptance, or validation. She no longer chases people who do not value her. She no longer stays where she is not respected. She no longer gives second chances to behavior that Allah would not approve of. Her decisions become guided by faith, not fear. This is why a woman who trusts Allah is impossible to control. She is not reckless, but she is fearless in the ways that matter. She is not cold, but she is untouchable by manipulation. She is not detached, but she is grounded in a strength that does not depend on any human being. Her heart is already held by the one who created it. And a heart held by Allah cannot be owned by anyone else. My beloved brothers and sisters, especially my dear sisters listening today, I want you to take a moment and reflect on everything we've discussed. Strength is not an accident. Dignity is not inherited. Confidence is not a gift some women are born with while others are left behind. These qualities grow the moment you decide that your heart belongs to Allah and not to the people who misunderstand, underestimate, or mishandle you. A woman does not become strong by shouting, arguing, or fighting every battle. She becomes strong by mastering her inner world. She becomes strong the moment she knows her worth comes from Allah alone. She becomes strong the moment she sets boundaries without guilt, protects her peace without apology, and refuses to let manipulation define her decisions. She becomes strong when she stops breaking herself in the name of compromise, when she chooses silence from wisdom rather than fear, when she surrounds herself with people who remind her of who she is, not those who benefit from her forgetting. Above all, she becomes strongest when she trusts Allah more than she fears losing anyone on this earth. That trust is the anchor that keeps her steady when life shakes her. It is the shield that protects her from emotional games. It is the clarity that helps her see who truly belongs in her life and who doesn't. It is the light that guides her away from relationships built on fear and toward relationships built on sincerity and respect. My dear sisters, never confuse humility with allowing yourself to be diminished. Never mistake patience for tolerating mistreatment. Never call emotional suffering sabr when Allah never asked you to carry harm. Never let anyone use religion to control you when Allah Himself honors you, protects you, and lifts you higher than people ever could. You were created with dignity. You were created with purpose. You were created with a strength that comes alive the moment you remember who your Creator is. No human being, not a husband, not a fiancé, not a friend, not a family member, has the right to break what Allah built strong. Walk with calmness, not with fear. Walk with clarity, not with confusion. Walk with dignity, not with desperation. Walk with Allah, not with the world's expectations. And when you walk with Allah, something extraordinary happens. The things you were once afraid to lose no longer control you. The people who tried to manipulate you no longer intimidate you, and the situations that once overwhelmed you no longer define you. You stand firm, steady, peaceful, guided. You become a woman whose strength does not come from loudness or anger, but from spiritual alignment, emotional maturity, and unwavering trust. May Allah grant you the wisdom to see your worth clearly, the courage to protect your heart, the strength to walk away from what harms you, and the tranquility that only He can place inside the soul. May He surround you with people who uplift you, free you from the grip of those who drain you, and guide you toward relationships built on sincerity, mercy, and mutual respect. Remember this, my dear sisters. When Allah is with you, no one can control you. And when you know your worth with Him, the world can no longer make you doubt yourself. May Allah bless you, protect you, and strengthen you always. Ameen.